July 22, 1944, 4:17 a.m., Soviet tank commander Major Andrew Volkov stared through his periscope at something that chilled him to the bone. A lone Tiger tank, number 217, the tank commanded by Lieutenant Otto Carius. Volkov commanded 17 brand new JS-1 Stalin tanks and 5 T-34-85s, 22 tanks against 1. The math was clear. The overwhelming superiority was obvious. But in the next 19 minutes, Major Volkov would realize that mathematics on the battlefield sometimes means nothing. 19 minutes, 22 Soviet tanks against Tiger 217. By the end, all 22 would be burning wrecks, and Carius would drive on. This was just the beginning of what would be documented in both sides' war diaries as one of the most extraordinary chapters in armored warfare. 21 days, 42 tanks, 1 crew. Fighting against total collapse, Operation Bagration, the very name struck German soldiers with dread. This wasn't just another attack, it was annihilation. Between June 23rd and August 19th, 1944, the Soviets would throw 2.5 million soldiers against 800,000 German defenders, 5,000 tanks against less than 1,000, over 6,000 aircraft against 800. This wasn't a battle. It was a roller of steel and fire, designed to utterly crush Army Group Center, and it did. 28 German divisions were completely wiped out. 450,000 men dead, wounded, or captured. The greatest military defeat in German history. Bigger than Stalingrad, more catastrophic than Normandy. The Wehrmacht was collapsing. Entire armies vanished from the map. Divisions that had been fighting since 1941 simply ceased to exist. Commanders lost contact with their units. Radio transmissions went silent. Retreat routes became death traps. And in the middle of this inferno, one unit fought on, Heavy Panzer Battalion 502, and at its head, Tiger 217, commanded by a 25-year-old lieutenant who already wore the Knight's Cross and whose name struck fear into Soviet tank crews. Otto Carius wasn't some propaganda hero. He was a pharmacist from a small town, drafted in 1940 and initially assigned to the infantry. He was too short for tank crews, supposedly. 5'1", too short, they said. But Carius had something that couldn't be measured, an understanding of the battlefield that bordered on the psychic, a calmness under fire that stabilized his crew, and a precision that impressed even seasoned commanders. By July 1944, he had already destroyed over 100 tanks, but what was to come in the next 21 days would dwarf even that. Because while the Wehrmacht crumbled in Bagration, Carius and his crew would prove that skill and camaraderie can sometimes overcome overwhelming odds. Not always, not on a strategic level. But in those burning summer days of 1944, on the roads between Daugavpils and Riga, Tiger 217 would become a legend to both sides. The crew of Tiger 217 had been together for months. Sergeant Albert Kirscher at the gun, a Bavarian from Munich with the eyes of an eagle. He could spot a weld seam on a T-34 from 1,500 meters. Corporal Kramer as the loader, the strongest man in the company. He could reload an armor-piercing 40 shell in 7 seconds when every second counted. Driver Zwetty, a man from Silesia who steered the Tiger with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. And radio operator Bix, who intercepted the radio messages that saved lives. Together, these 5 men in a 56-ton steel coffin had been through more than most people could imagine. 18 months of continuous combat, 214 engagements, over 100 confirmed kills, and they were all still alive. In an era when tank crews survived an average of 6 weeks, that was a statistical miracle. But it wasn't luck, it was skill, it was trust, it was camaraderie to the end. As Bagration began, every man in Tiger 217 knew that this was different. The radio messages were desperate. Entire divisions were being overrun. Columns of refugees choked the roads. The Red Army wasn't just advancing, it was devouring everything. July 22, 1944, 4:17 a.m. Malinava, a northern suburb of Daugavpils. Tiger, 217 and 7 other Tigers from the 2nd Company received orders to halt the Soviet advance. The message was simple. A tank brigade is breaking through at Malinava. Stop them! 8 Tigers against a brigade. Carius read the radio message and said nothing. What was there to say? You did your job. You did your duty. You held the line for your comrades. They rolled out through the dawn. The Tiger moved at 35 kilometers per hour along the muddy roads. The Maybach engine roared with its 700 horsepower. Every man in the crew knew his task. Kershaw adjusted the sights. Bremer prepared the ammunition. 80 shells, 57 armor-piercing 39, 23 armor-piercing 40 with tungsten core for heavy targets. Zweti kept the track. Bix listened to the radio messages, and Carius stood in the commander's cupola, scanning the horizon. Then he saw them, T-34s, lots of T-34s, and something new, larger silhouettes, wider, the JS-1 Stalin, the new Soviet heavy tank with 120 millimeters of frontal armor. Carius counted quickly, 17 Stalins, 5 T-34s, and they were moving straight towards Malinava, where the 2nd Company waited. Major Volkov in his JS-1 saw the Tigers and hesitated. He had heard of these tanks. The reports were alarming, but he had 22 tanks. The Germans had 8. The math was clear. He ordered the attack. 4:23 a.m. The Battle of Malinava began. And in the next 19 minutes, reality would defy mathematics. Carius didn't give long orders, only precise words. Kershaw, target left, 1,000. Stalin, front plate. Kershaw acquired the target. The JS-1 was rolling down a road, its turret front perfectly presented. 88mm KWK 36L56, the most feared tank gun in the world. 4,900 millimeters of barrel, 800 meters per second muzzle velocity. And in Kershaw's hands, lethal precision. Fire! The Tiger shuddered. The armor-piercing 40 shell with tungsten core left the barrel at 930 meters per second. At 1,000 meters, it could penetrate 138 millimeters of armor. The JS-1 had 120. The impact was catastrophic. The shell ripped through the front armor, detonated in the fighting compartment, and the JS-1 Stalin tank exploded from the inside. Crew KIA, tank destroyed. 04:24 hours, 16 seconds since the fight began. 1 Stalin tank annihilated. Major Andrew Volkov watched the first Stalin tank burn and understood. These weren't ordinary tanks. These were Tigers, and they were precise. He ordered his units to disperse and close to firing range. The T-34-85 had an F-34 gun with 85 millimeters, effective range against Tiger front armor, less than 800 meters. They needed to get closer. But Carius wasn't letting them get closer. Tiger 217 fired again. Corporal Kramer reloaded. 7 seconds. The next armor-piercing shell was ready. Sergeant Albert Kershaw acquired the second target. A T-34 at 900 meters. Fire. Hit. Turret blown clean off. 04:25 hours. 2 tanks destroyed. 37 seconds of combat time. The other 7 Tigers of the 2nd Company opened fire. The battle became an inferno. 8 Tigers against 22 Soviet tanks. But the Tigers had the range. They had the armor. They had the precision. The Soviet tanks tried to maneuver, but every movement exposed weaknesses. Flank, rear, turret ring. Kershaw never missed. 04:28 hours. 5 minutes since the fight began. 9 Soviet tanks were burning. Volkov's brigade was breaking. He radioed desperately for reinforcements. But there were none. The entire front was collapsing. No one could help. Tiger 217 moved. Zweti steered the tank into a new position, hillside, line of sight to 3 more JS-1 Stalin tanks. Carius's voice remained calm, as if he were running a pharmacy, not fighting a war. Kershaw, 3 targets, 1,200 meters. From left to right, work through them. Kershaw fired. Kramer reloaded, fired, reloaded, fired. 3 hits. 3 JS-1 Stalin tanks burning within 21 seconds. The survivors tried to flee. But Tigers have an effective range of 2,000 meters. Escape was not an option. 04:36 hours, 13 minutes since the fight began. 17 Soviet tanks destroyed. Major Andrew Volkov was dead. His JS-1 was one of the first to burn. The surviving 5 tanks tried to retreat, but the roads were blocked with burning wrecks. 1 T-34 tried to escape cross-country. Tiger 217 rotated its turret, 90 degrees in 10 seconds. Kershaw tracked the target. 1,500 meters, moving target. He compensated for speed, distance, wind, fire, hit. The T-34 exploded. Then there was silence. The kind of silence that comes after intense combat, when your ears are ringing, and you smell smoke, and your heart is still pounding like a hammer. 04:42 hours, 19 minutes. 22 Soviet tanks, all destroyed. 8 Tigers, 0 losses. The crew of Tiger 217 said nothing. There was nothing to say. They had accomplished their mission, but every man knew that this was only the beginning. Carius radioed his report. 22 enemy tanks destroyed. Malinava held, 2nd Company intact. The response came immediately. Well done. Hold position. More enemy tanks approaching. Tiger 217 had fired 14 armor-piercing shells. 66 remained. They would need every single one, because this was only day 1. Operation Bagration would last for weeks. And Carius's war had just begun. In the Soviet lines, the news spread quickly. An entire tank brigade annihilated in less than 20 minutes. By 8 Tigers, the commanders demanded reports. What had happened? How was that possible? The survivors, the few who made it back, told the same story. 1 tank, number 217, every shot a hit, every hit lethal. They spoke of the Tiger like a demon, unstoppable, precise, unrelenting. And its tank commander, this Lieutenant Carius, became a name that inspired fear. July 23, 1944. The next day, the Red Army learned nothing. They threw more tanks at the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, 24 T-34s and 3 Su-85 tank destroyers near Daugavpils. Tiger 217 destroyed 7 of them in 34 minutes. July 24th. Another 18 Soviet tanks destroyed by the 2nd Company. Carius personally accounted for 5. July 25th. A single JS-2. The new Stalin tank with 160 millimeters of front armor and a 122 millimeter gun. The most dangerous Soviet tank, Tiger 217, hit it from 2,200 meters. Mantlet hit, shell penetrated, tank burning. July 26th, July 27th, July 28th, day after day, hour after hour, while the Wehrmacht collapsed. While entire armies ceased to exist, Tiger 217 continued to fight. Carius commanded, Kershaw aimed, Kramer loaded. Zweti drove, Bix radioed, and the count rose, 25, 30, 35, every kill documented. Everyone confirmed by war diaries from both sides. July 27, 1944. Carius received a radio message. Report to Division Command. He drove back, covered in dust and soot, his uniform soaked in sweat and oil. The general was waiting. He had a small black box in his hand. Lieutenant Carius, for extraordinary courage and outstanding tactical performance, I award you the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross. The general hung the award around Carius' neck. It was the 62nd awarding of the oak leaves. Carius saluted. He said nothing about the award. Later he would write that awards were meaningless when comrades died. But on this day, July 27, 1944, his crew was still intact. All 5 men, alive. And that was the only award that truly mattered. But the Red Army had had enough. They changed their tactics. They would no longer attack Tiger 217 head-on. They would overwhelm, mass against precision, quantity against quality. August 1st, 1944, near Oga, south of Riga, Carius and 2 other Tigers were surrounded by 47 T-34s, 47 against 3. The Tigers formed a triangular formation, back-to-back, each covering a sector. The T-34s attacked from all sides. It was insanity. Shells bounced off the Tiger armor. The noise was deafening, metal on metal. Explosions. Radio transmissions overlapped. But Carius's voice remained calm. Kershaw, target 10 o'clock, 800, fire. Hit. Target 2 o'clock, 600, fire. Hit. The battle lasted 51 minutes. Tiger 217 fired all its remaining armor-piercing shells. 80 shells, 37 confirmed hits. In the end, 24 T-34s lay burning around the 3 Tigers. The Soviet survivors retreated. 3 Tigers, no losses. But they were out of ammunition. Zweti drove them back through enemy-controlled territory. 30 kilometers with an empty gun. That might have been the bravest thing they did, because a Tiger without ammunition is just a big target. The days blurred together. August 2nd, August 3rd, August 5th. Every day was a fight. Every day was Soviet tanks, and every day Tiger 217 survived. The count climbed, 38, 40, 42. On August 9th, 1944, 21 days after Malinava, the company radioed in its final report, Tiger 217, 42 confirmed kills since July 22nd, crew intact, vehicle operational. The Schwer Panzerabteilung 502 was ordered to retreat to Riga. Operation Bagration was over. The Wehrmacht was defeated. But Tiger 217 never lost. Carius and his crew, in 21 days, destroyed more enemy tanks than most units did in the entire war. They had broken all the rules of tank warfare. They had defied mathematics. They had overcome overwhelming odds. And they were all still alive, but the price was invisible. Carius later wrote in his book, Tigers in the Mud, that every kill meant 4 or 5 dead men, 42 tanks, 210 Soviet soldiers dead, men with families, men who had no choice. He carried that burden his entire life. Sergeant Albert Kershaw never spoke about the war again. Corporal Kramer had nightmares well into the 60s. Zweti passed away in 1962, and friends said he dreamed every night of the sound of the Maybach engine. Radio operator Bix became a teacher and never told his students that he had been in the war. And Carius himself, the man who became a legend, opened a pharmacy in Hirschweiler-Pettersheim and lived quietly until 2015. He passed at 92, peacefully, surrounded by family. But the men who knew him said that a part of him never left Tiger 217. The Soviet records of Carius are fascinating. After the wars, when archives were opened, historians found several reports about Tiger 217. One Soviet lieutenant colonel wrote in 1944, "This single German tank has done more damage than an entire division. We must make tactical changes." Another report from August 1944 identifies Carius by name. The German tank commander Carius is extremely dangerous. All units are ordered to avoid a direct frontal assault against his position. Post-war interviews with Soviet veterans show a mixture of fear and respect. A former T-34 commander said in 1989, "We were afraid of all Tigers, But of Tiger 217, we were terrified. You knew, if you saw his tank, you were probably going to die. Another Soviet veteran said, Carius wasn't a monster. He was a soldier doing his job, and he did it better than anyone else. That's all. The tactical analysis of Carius's achievements was taught at military academies after the war, both in Germany and in the USA. What made him so effective? First, patience. Carius never fired immediately. He waited for the perfect shot. Front plate, mantlet, turret ring. Second, positioning. He always chose terrain that maximized lines of sight and offered cover: hillsides, forest edges, city ruins. Third, movement. He never stayed in one position for long. Fire, move, fire. Fourth, and this is crucial, trust in his crew. Carius gave clear, precise orders: no panic, no rushing, calm. Under maximum stress, his crew trusted him, absolutely. And that trust made them faster, more efficient, more deadly. Fifth, technical understanding. Carius knew every weak point of every enemy tank: T-34, mantlet at 80 degrees, JS-2 Stalin tank, below the gun barrel, KV-1, turret ring area. This knowledge, combined with Sergeant Albert Kirsch's precision, made every shot almost guaranteed to kill. But here's what's often forgotten. Carius was not a lone wolf. He operated within a system. The Schwer Panzer Abteilung 502 was one of the most experienced units in the Wehrmacht. These men had fought together since 1942. They knew each other. They trusted each other. When Carius took a position, other Tigers secured his flanks. When he reloaded, comrades provided cover. This was not one man against an army. This was a brotherhood of tank crews who refused to break, even as everything around them was falling apart. And that is perhaps the true lesson of Tiger 217. Not that one man can defeat overwhelming odds, but that men who rely on each other, who stand together until the end, can sometimes accomplish the impossible. Not always, not on a strategic level. Germany lost Operation Bagration. The Wehrmacht was crushed, but in those 21 days, on the burning roads between Daugavpils and Riga, Tiger 217 showed that skill and camaraderie still matter, even in the darkest hour. Let me tell you about the technical side, because the German audience appreciates that. The Tiger I had 100 millimeters of frontal armor, almost invulnerable to most Soviet tank guns, except at very close range. The 88mm KWK-36 gun could penetrate the strongest Allied armor at 2,000 meters. The Maybach HL-230 P45 engine produced 700 horsepower, moving 56 tons of steel at 35 kilometers per hour. On the road, that's impressive German engineering. But technology alone doesn't win battles. The Soviets had more tanks, better logistics, inexhaustible reserves. The T-34-85 was faster, more agile, cheaper to produce. The JS-2 Stalin tank had a more powerful gun. But in July 1944, in the hands of Carius and Kirsch, the Tiger was invincible. Not because of the technology, because of the men inside. There's a story that Carius tells in his memoirs that illustrates this perfectly. August 6, 1944, after a particularly brutal engagement. All 5 men of the crew were exhausted. They had been fighting non-stop for 18 hours, no food, little water. The fighting compartment of a Tiger reaches 50 degrees Celsius during prolonged firing. They were dehydrated, exhausted, on the verge of collapse. Carius ordered a break. They parked the Tiger behind a ruined barn. All 5 men climbed out and sat on the warm armor. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Then radio operator Bix pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes, 5 cigarettes, one for each man. They smoked in silence. For 10 minutes, there was no war, no tanks, no dead, just 5 men sharing a cigarette, knowing that they all might die the next day. But in that moment, they were alive. They were together, and that was enough. Carius later wrote, "In that moment, I understood camaraderie, not the propaganda version, the real one, men who share everything with each other, even when all they have is 5 cigarettes and 10 minutes of peace." The story of Tiger 217 did not end with Bagration. Carius fought until the very last day of the war. He survived the entire Eastern Front. He survived the retreat back to Germany. He survived the collapse. In May 1945, when Germany surrendered, he handed over his Tiger to American troops and went into a prisoner of war camp. He was released in September 1945. Returned home, studied pharmacy, and opened his pharmacy, Tiger Pharmacy. The name was a silent reminder. For decades, he lived quietly. He rarely spoke about the war. Only in the 1980s, when historians started interviewing veterans, did he tell his story. His book, Tigers in the Mud, became a classic of military history. Not because of propaganda, not because of glorification, but because of brutal honesty about the reality of war. Carius didn't sugarcoat anything. He wrote about the fear, the exhaustion, the nightmares, the loss of comrades, the burden of having survived when so many died. These were not just statistics from dusty archives. These were the moments that decided the fate of millions, real soldiers, real fear, real consequences. These stories must never be forgotten. If these historical truths are important to you, then support me with YouTube's Super Thanks. The golden heart below. Every super thanks allows me to spend weeks in archives, digitizing rare documents, interviewing last surviving eyewitnesses before their stories disappear forever. The generation that experienced these events is dying. In 10 years, there will be no living witnesses left. Every story I preserve, every document I find, is a piece of history that would otherwise be lost. Help me preserve these memories for generations to come. Not as propaganda, not as glorification, but as a reminder of what war really means. The humanity, the courage, the suffering, all of it. The Soviet veterans who fought against Carius had their own stories. A former major of the Red Army, Viktor Petrov, was interviewed in 1991. He was at Malinava. He survived as one of the few. He said, "I hated the Germans. They had destroyed my country, killed my family. But Carius, I respected him. He was a soldier like us. He did his duty, and he was damn good at it." After the war, I learned that he became a pharmacist. That made me laugh. The man we feared the most was now selling medicine. Maybe that's justice. Maybe he's healing now, after destroying so much. I never wished him anything bad. The war was the enemy, not him. Another Soviet veteran, whose name was not recorded, said in 1987, "Tiger 217 was like a ghost. You could never find him, but he always found you. And when he found you, you were dead. We lost so many good men to that tank, but I understand now that on the other side, there were also good men, just men doing what they were told, like us." Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Carius's story is what happened after the war. Many German veterans hid their past, but Carius did not hide. He was not ashamed, but he also didn't glorify anything. When young Germans asked him what war was, he always said the same thing: "War is hell. Even if you win, you lose. I destroyed 42 tanks. I killed hundreds of men. I received medals. And every night, for the rest of my life, I saw their faces. This is not glory. This is a burden. Remember that. This honesty made him respected, not only in Germany, everywhere. Military historians from the US, Britain, Russia, all studied his tactics, not to glorify war, but to understand. What makes a man effective in combat? What holds a crew together when everything is falling apart? What is the difference between survival and death? The answer, according to Carius, was always the same: camaraderie, trust, skill, and a little bit of luck. "I had the best crew in the Wehrmacht," he once said. Sergeant Albert Kirscher never missed. Corporal Kramer was tireless. Sveti drove like the devil. Radio operator Bix heard everything. And me? I kept them alive. That's all a tank commander can do, keep his men alive. I was lucky. I made it. Others did not. I think about them every day. The ones who didn't come home, the ones who died in burning tanks, the ones who bled out in field hospitals. I survived, but that doesn't mean I won. Nobody wins in war. Some die. Others survive with scars. That's all. 2015. Carius died peacefully in his sleep. He was 92. His funeral was small, private, without military honors, but former soldiers from Germany, the US, even Russia sent wreaths. The card on one Russian wreath said simply, "For a worthy opponent, may you find peace." That is perhaps the greatest legacy of Otto Carius. Not the 62 tanks he destroyed in total, not the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, not the legend of Tiger 217, but that after the war he remained human, that he never lost his humanity, that he carried the burden, but never taught hate. In an era full of propaganda and ideology, Carius was simply a soldier, a good soldier, a man who did his duty, who fought for his comrades, who survived, and who spent the rest of his life healing, not destroying. The 22 tanks of Malinava, the 42 kills in 21 days. These numbers are documented in war diaries. They are verifiable. They are real. But they don't tell the whole story. The whole story is 5 men in a steel coffin who refused to give up when everything around them was collapsing, who held on to each other as the world exploded, who lived because they trusted each other. That's the story of Tiger 217. That's the story of Otto Carius. No propaganda, no glorification, just truth. Hard, uncomfortable, honest truth about war, courage, and survival. The crew of Tiger 217 took different paths after the war. Sergeant Albert Kirscher, the gunner, whose precision was legendary, returned to Munich. He worked as a metal worker and never spoke about the war. His family only learned after his death in 1979 that he was one of the most successful tank gunners in history. In his estate, they found his service record with all confirmed kills. 136 tanks, over 3 years, with 3 different commanders, but mostly with Carius. Corporal Kramer, the loader, whose strength gave Tiger 217 the firepower it needed, emigrated to Brazil in 1951. He became a farmer in Santa Catarina. Neighbors said he was the quietest man they had ever known. But in the early years after the war, he had nightmares. He would wake up screaming, feeling the weight of the armor-piercing shells still in his hands. It wasn't until the 60s that the nightmares stopped. He died in 1998, 83 years old, surrounded by grandchildren who never knew that their gentle grandpa had once fought in hell. Driver Sveti, who steered Tiger 217 like a precision instrument, had the most tragic end. He survived the war, returned to Silesia, but Silesia was now Polish. He was expelled, came to West Germany, found work as a truck driver, but the war experiences haunted him. In 1962, at only 38 years old, he died of a heart attack. Doctors said his heart was exhausted, but friends knew better. His heart had been broken since 1945. Radio operator Bix became a primary school teacher in Hesse. He taught history, but when students asked if he had been in the war, he changed the subject. Only shortly before his death in 2003 did he tell his son the truth. "I was in Tiger 217. I was part of something I could never forget, but I didn't want another generation dreaming of being soldiers. War is not an adventure. War is the death of everything good in man. I wanted my students to understand that without having to experience it." These 5 men spent 21 days in hell together. They trusted each other absolutely. They kept each other alive, and after the war they never saw each other again. That's perhaps the most tragic truth about camaraderie in war. It's intense, it's real, but it rarely survives peacetime. Carius tried to keep in touch. He wrote letters, but the answers became less frequent. Each man was trying to rebuild his life, and Tiger 217 was a part of their past that most wanted to forget. Only Carius couldn't forget. Maybe because he was the tank commander, maybe because he made the decisions that kept them alive, or maybe because he understood that their story was important, not as propaganda, but as a testament to what people go through when the world is burning. What impressed you the most? Many viewers have shared incredible family stories, grandfathers who were there, letters found in attics, war diaries that lasted for generations. Share your family story from that time below. Every comment is a piece of history that we preserve together. Was your grandfather on the Eastern Front? Tell his story. Have you found documents? Describe them. These memories are valuable. In 50 years, the last eyewitnesses will be gone. But if we write down their stories now, they live on forever. Preserve this history with me. Comment below. Let's create a community that remembers, not to glorify, but to never forget what war really costs. We owe them that. To the men like Carius, to the men like Major Andrew Volkov, to all who fought, to all who died, to all who survived with scars, we owe them remembrance, honest remembrance. That's the least we can do.